that looks like my presentation. All right, let's see. There we go.
Well, I'll start off by
saying hello to everyone here. This is, my name's Jared, Jared Mauch. I work for Akamai Technologies, but I was asked to come here to talk about, as I call it, my little hobby ISP that I started off nearby my house. This is a very exciting thing for me. This is my first time to Africa, and so obviously first time to South Africa as well. As part of that, I've gotten to travel around a little bit for my jobs before. But yeah, please feel free to ask lots of questions. Find me afterwards. I'm here through Friday night and such. So I'm very excited to be here. So I'm here to tell you about what I did, which was I went and I wisely or unwisely chose to build a greenfield fiber network. Right at the end, right at the beginning of the pandemic times. So, quick background on me. I've been working on the internet since 1995. I started off working in the U.S. We had these NSFNet, or National Science Foundation funded regional network companies there. Those eventually, as the internet was becoming more commercial, were being sold off to private companies. So I ended up working for one of those private companies. And then I moved on to another company called Voyager at the time. And we were doing dial-up in the early days of DSL, through the year 2000. And going and buying up and integrating a lot of those companies together back in the days when we had to type modem initialization strings and such. And then I moved on to actually end up working for NTT, the Japanese telephone company, working on their global backbone through 2017. And as mentioned, I've been at Akamai since then, since 2017. Internet and telecom really have a very different mindsets when you look at them, especially in a more heavily regulated market. You have approaches for doing the business that are very different, but the technologies for telecom, for delivering voice and delivering packet data have had a very heavy overlap. And as we've seen, over this time period, we have basically a complete overlap now. Almost all telecommunications networks are built on top of Ethernet, which is, not driven out of the ITU and such. And I've been a lifetime resident in my state in Michigan, right in the center of, the U.S. And I've always been very passionate about computers and technology. I've been doing computers since I was a little kid in school. I was the kid in school that the teachers or the librarian would say, go to this classroom and get this kid when they were not there for the day. They actually had it in their lesson plans to go get this kid out of this classroom and he'll help set up the computers in the library or something for the classes if there's trouble. And out of the necessity of my life, I now own a telephone company in the United States. So let's talk about the market in which I'm in. So when you're going and doing these things, you have to do a lot of research before you go into any business endeavor. I tried very hard to get the existing telecommunication providers to go and build to where I was. In the U.S., there's a large company called Comcast, which was built up out of the integration of many of the smaller cable companies and stuff like that, and they wanted $50,000 to go and build out service to me. And then also, this is the marvelous speed and pricing. Actually, I think the pricing has gone up since the screenshot. But I do go and I check the AT&T website in the US periodically. And they're very kind. They send me all sorts of ads and marketing material about how they're offering fiber in my community. But still, the fastest speed they offer commercially is a 1.5 meg DSL line, which, if you actually look, it says Internet Basic 1.0. So they're really only guaranteeing speeds of up to 1 megabit, which in 2023, I think many of us know that's not adequate. So that little pin in Google Maps, Google Earth is where my house is. You can see there's actually some pretty dense development nearby. But I always describe where I live as farm adjacent. You know, the property I live on is a little bit more than an acre. And you know, there's a farmer who farms the property right behind, right to the north of me and right to the south of our neighborhood. And the little farm strip you can kind of see. You know, there's a couple of houses on large lots. You know, right there where I live. So yeah, what do? You start a telco when you're faced with challenges of no internet access out there. So I went and I filed a tariff. I had to go and find a lawyer, find the right lawyer to actually go and file a tariff, and I actually have it up on my website. And then, you know, I recently found out there's somebody I knew, they didn't know the underpants gnomes meme, which if you haven't seen this old South Park episode, it's basically there's these guys, they steal the underpants, and then their goal is eventually profit, maybe? And so my goal was, well, I'm going to solve my problem. I don't have good internet access at my home, and then hopefully one day I'll profit from it, maybe. So I spent a lot of time doing, you know, some of the early research. I played around with, you know, doing bi-di-optics on active Ethernet. I actually bought one of the first, you know, so there's Ubiquiti, who has their GPON platform. I noticed the hotel here has a lot of the Ubiquiti, it looks like security cameras, and the Unify access points, you know, outside here at the hotel. And I actually bought one of the first GPON beta units that they had available in the States. And those units are great, but they also have some drawbacks there. And then I spent a lot of time and effort marketing and kind of talking to all my neighbors. I lived in my house since 2002, but I hadn't gotten to know kind of the extended neighborhood people, aside from the people who lived on my street. I hadn't gotten to know the people who were maybe a mile down the road or a little bit further. And now I'm well known by all of them. I think, you know, for better or for worse, hopefully right now for better. And I ended up mailing a lot of these people actually physical letters in the mail. So they would go out to their mailbox and they would have, I started off printing them on, you know, labels out of the, you know, out of an Excel spreadsheet onto envelopes, and, you know, sitting there and applying them with postage stamps and such. But I actually, one of the things I learned through all of this is if you actually handwrite their name on the envelope, and I have some really awful computer nerd handwriting, they're way more likely to open the envelope and not think that it's some, you know, direct marketing campaign, which I found, that was one of the things I found very surprising, you know, about that. And I also spent a lot of time, you know, talking to other ISPs. I've been doing a lot of stuff in kind of the big carrier space, you know, at NTT, we were turning up lots of 10 gigs on subsea cable systems, lots of 10 gigs within, you know, the country and, you know, within the US, and eventually moved on to 100 gigs and stuff like that. But it's really important to actually talk to other people who have actual real experience in there. And I really benefited from doing that, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. And I love talking about this project. You know, for me, it's like talking about one of my children. I can spend all sorts of time telling you about my daughter and her figure skating and the stuff that she does, or we can talk about this. And I'll probably, you know, I might enjoy this one a little bit more, but I'm happy to talk to you about, you know, both and such. But it's really, in a community like this, we have the opportunity to share our knowledge and share our experience and our lessons learned. So I spent a lot of time talking to community groups in Michigan. There were ones that were trying to start up, you know, ISPs. And one of the local townships, they went and actually put on their ballot an initiative to go and vote for whether or not they should actually fund building an entirely underground fiber optic internet service in their area, because none of the large carriers like AT&T and Comcast or Charter in the US,
none of them wanted to actually build into that area because it was, you know, they didn't see the economic value in doing that. And so I talked to the people who were behind doing that. One of those initiatives succeeded and is, you know, went very well. One of them the community reaction was very negative, and it actually did not pass when it was on the ballot, it was very interesting for me to watch. And I attended, even though I didn't live in those communities, I attended those meetings so I could understand what it was going to be like going out and trying to sell and market this type of service with people, and see what the different reactions are from those folks. So, what do? Well, you're going to start a business, so you have to actually go and spend some money. So I actually went and I took my bonus from 1 year, and I took a portion of that, and I actually bought a fusion splicer. I bought it off AliExpress, like all great technology comes from. Shockingly enough, I was able to figure it out. I was able to, cut some patch cords together, put them, cut them apart, put them back together, and actually have them work. And then I started buying fiber. I had, for about the 10 years prior to actually building this out, I had actually become good friends with the local wireless ISP. He and I are still good friends to this day. And he now buys his internet access from me, which is, quite an interesting, turn of events. But through that, had the opportunity to help him and experiment with all that fiber technology. Sorry. And then, of course, anyone who's had to actually debug fiber, you actually need OTDR. You have to be able to find the distance to the fault. So you have to start spending some more money. So I have to actually go design a fiber network, figure out where we're going to build it underground, get our tariff. In Michigan, there's a system in the U.S. Some people think of it as DigSafe, but when you have to call before you go and dig. And so when you're going to go out and excavate, even in your own yard as a homeowner, you're supposed to call the utility companies first, and there's a special telephone number, 811, in the U.S. And that goes to the statewide agency that is responsible for doing that. It's a free service that the utility companies have to pay for. So I had to join the system and start paying in even before I put my first line in the ground. Then I went and I filed for a permit. This took a long time the very first time. It should have been very straightforward because as a registered licensed utility, they should have just automatically approved my permit. But as a brand new entrant to the market, they wanted to learn a lot about me first and figure out how I was going to respond. When they threw me a curveball, or they said, "Well, you need to be on the, you have to only be on the east or on the north side of the road for new utilities." Where I live, and it's interesting when the road curves. Which side is the north side and east side when you're going through that curve, and what happens if it changes? And stuff like that. I have to go and learn all about this. I was hoping to start construction. Obviously I went and I filed the permit in 2019, so I was like, yeah, I should be able to build in a couple months. I'll be able to build this later this year, and go and launch my network at the end of 2019, and have good internet access at my house for the first time in the 17 years that I was living there. Unfortunately, because of what happened, it ended up taking me until September to actually get all the permits done, and then by that point, all the contractors, they were busy for the rest of the year, because where I live, once you hit about middle of October, the ground starts to freeze, because we have snow and all of that other unpleasantness that my understanding is you don't have that here. So, what do? You have to, spend a bunch of money, a bunch of time doing stuff. So you really have to start small with all of this. As you saw, I spent a little bit of money, to go and buy, some of the technical equipment. You get a fusion splicer off of AliExpress. You might be paying $2,000 or something like that initially, and such. But then you also have to find the people to sell you all the pipe, all the splice enclosures, all the boxes. And I went and I incrementally, spread that out. All of my guesses in advance told me that this was going to be about a $60,000 project.
So I had to go and line up all of this money. I went and I took one of the ISPs I talked to. They've since been sold and integrated into somewhere else, but it was called Virgin's Fiber, or Virgin's Broadband Fiber. What they did is they allowed a homeowner to prepay, some amount of money. So in some cases, it said prepay $5,000, and you get a $50 credit for 100 months. And that allowed me to go and have, not everyone can afford that, but a few people who were able to do that, they were able to help kind of feed into that seed money. So I personally wasn't putting all the money in, but they also got basically their money back in the, over the length of time of service. And that credit that stays with that address and stays with that property. Today, I do a very similar model to this now, where I'll give somebody a free installation, and it counts as a 100% service credit these days when I do this. So they might prepay 3, 4, 5 years for service, but they're able to get service much faster than they would otherwise, and that helps offset my direct construction costs in the beginning. And so, like any fun business, you have to spend time with the spreadsheet. So you have to go and figure out, okay, how much is it going to cost me to get internet? How much is it going to cost me to get that internet installed? All of these things that end up adding up. And once you start doing that, all of a sudden my $60,000 estimate, I ended up, as you see, my total cost estimate was about $139 here in the spreadsheet. In actuality, it was about $161,000. So having some flexibility with the capital was really, helpful. And then you have to actually go and estimate for the business. As engineers, one of the key things we need to do is actually understand the underlying economics of what we're doing. You can go to the management and say, I need this big fancy router, but if you can't make the business case to go with it as well, you're gonna have a much harder time. It's not impossible, but you're gonna have a much harder time if you don't understand what a lot of those underlying costs are. And so I bucketed up the subscribers, I figured out, I came up with some guesses of what I was gonna do. The ISP name is up there that I sell internet access to now, and they pay for internet access, and it ends up working out great. Now, of course, I didn't get all those customers installed on day one, but this was giving me a good idea of how long it was going to take for me to do things, and then based on when things like, the internet service, for my second carrier came in, all of a sudden, you end up with, well, I'll never end up being profitable. Having fun with writing the formulas for the spreadsheets is enjoyable. So once you understand what those are, you understand what your run rate is, your expenses, and really figuring out things like insurance or permit, annual permit fees or licenses and stuff like that. You need to go and factor those in. You also have to factor in what happens when somebody digs up your line. I had a contractor. We came out, we marked the line. This home was 2,000 feet. Off of the road, so a fair distance. What's that? Probably 900 meters or something like that. 800-900 meters off the road. Somebody dug up the line. We had to replace 100 meters of the drop cable. And that contractor ended up getting billed for it because they not only did they dig it up, but then they buried it again. So we had to dig, and it took time to find where they buried it, and they hid it from us. And the homeowner was very upset, not with us, but with their contractor they hired to do the landscaping who did that. But you also have to figure out what happens when people don't pay. I've been actually very lucky. I've only had one, technically two, but I've really only had one customer that's been a non-pay customer who walked away from their bill. And that's the only customer I've lost at all. So I built all that in 2020, and I got that network up right in September, and somehow did that all during that wonderful experience that we shall not talk in detail about, that started in 2020. And I managed to get my contractor to do that. In 2021, I ended up, I told my wife, I'm like, yep, we'll build internet access to the house, and then I'm done. Well, it turns out, a friend of mine in the industry, his sister moved nearby to where I live now. And she bought a farm and a house out by there. Well, she was told, oh yeah, you can get fiber, it'll be $5,000 install fee from this other company. Didn't happen. Turns out, I was the next best option. So I ended up going and building another almost exact same size project, about double the size, about another 3.5 kilometers or so, of stuff. I found that in building out there, I got over 50% of the customers along the way, and from that, I was able to actually ended up getting a fiber swap with another carrier. So I actually got even more fiber distance than what I was originally building as part of it, because this other carrier, they were coming out and trying to figure out how to cross this big swamp area, and they build mostly on poles, and I was actually building underground through that swampy area because I don't trust our local utility to maintain their poles. Which, if you ask me afterwards, I can show you pictures of some of their amazing poles and such. But I ended up getting a fiber swap, so I actually ended up getting almost double the fiber network distance out of this, as a result. And when I built the network initially, I was just going to build one conduit. But my contractor and others told me it's only a little bit more money for us to put a second conduit in. So it's basically the cost of that additional conduit, and it was only 25 cents more per foot for me. So that'd be 75 cents a meter roughly, right? So it's only a little bit more money to put a second conduit in. Because I had the forethought to build that second conduit and spent an extra about $10,000 up front in building that, I have the flexibility now that I was able to do this fiber swap, because I originally put like a very small count fiber cable, in that route, and then I came back 2 years later and I put in a 144 count fiber cable, and I have the now with that. I haven't cut everything over yet, but once I cut everything over, I'm going to actually take the 12 count fiber out of the other conduit, and then I'll still have an empty conduit. And so I'll still be able to go, if something happens later, I'll be able to bring in a 468 or 472 count cable or whatever, and put that in that conduit as well, or something, or a higher count fiber as well. So that 2021 expansion, you can kind of see here in this photo, there's that swamp right there. They had to go and cross that. That's about 200 meters or so that they had to bore underneath to stay there. And ended up, once we built out, the person's house that we were building to was only part of the way. The extra little extension off that road and this road to the south, that was all add-on. Those were all sort of extension areas to the network, because once people found out we were building, they got very excited and they were willing to put in their own money as well. And that's where having that model, where I can adapt to go and take the customer's money and use that to extend the network to them has really worked out well. And that's something that I've really, it's been really rewarding to me personally to see these people coming off of 3 megabit satellite connectivity and suddenly go to gigabit fiber at their house. And they literally run the speed tests, on their phone or and stuff, and they see that speed and they're very overjoyed. Now, there's a hint here, which is that this is that Hob Road, that was part of an RFP area. Well, at the same time, my local government was starting to say, well, internet isn't very available out there in these areas, and they actually went and they gave a list of about, I think it was 4,000 properties, 4,000 addresses that didn't have internet service, that weren't going to be covered by existing either state programs or federal programs run by the government to go and expand. And so now, all of a sudden, not only am I building this new network, but I'm also now submitting a bid, for money to be able to go and do, additional things. So, this, I didn't update this slide. I ended up signing the contract for this. It took almost a year to actually get this contract signed. So, it ended up signing it, and I got my counterside copy back in June 2022, last year, and such. And so because we've had success in building these areas, and building that out, things really worked out well for me, because I had built this network basically in just enough time that I qualified to bid on this other program, because I've been operating for more than a year and such. So in the US, we have this Federal Communications Commission, in the past, they had done these maps and these studies of where broadband was actually available. And it turns out that a lot of places, a lot of companies and governments, unless it's your own assets, you don't actually have a very good idea of where internet access is actually available. I'm imagining that may also be true here, is that you may have a community on one side of the road that has excellent access, and on the other side of the road it may not. And so the county where I live, in Washtenaw County, they performed this parcel by parcel survey in 2019. What's interesting is the person who did that is one of the same people who also was taking part in many of the other community outreach activities. And he actually, when the county put that up for bid, he was actually the one who ended up bidding on that, and ended up being somebody I knew, which was rather convenient. It's a very small community of people. I think is anybody who's been here, in the industry for more than a few years, you end up seeing the same faces, even if the company names may change. So this showed that even at my own house, where I knew I did not have service, where AT&T is offering that amazing, 1 meg, 1.5 meg DSL, it has shown that I had service there. And when you end up looking, these are all the addresses, like all the polygon shapes of all the addresses where they determined did not have access. I don't have a laser pointer here, but there is a little cutout there that actually that you can kind of see on there. Let me see if I can maybe make the mouse pointer go there. Does that show? It does. So right there, that's the section that I ended up building in 2021. So the shape that I submitted and said, oh yes, this is a fully funded project and it's being built, they excluded that area. As a result, some of those adjacent areas, it actually ended up making it, so I ended up winning the bid for that stuff. But like I said, we don't have very good accurate mapping. This is a mobile home community in the US, and what you actually see is, it shows that Comcast, the cable company, they service everything on the right, they service everything around, but they don't service the area right in the middle. And this is the quality of mapping that we have available, for us to go and figure out stuff. And this was an area that originally they actually tried to tell me that I won building into this trailer park. I was very excited because I was going to have to build a lot of, middle mile to be able to build there. So I was going to pass a lot of homes along the way and have a lot of opportunity, when I saw that. But I was also like, this doesn't make sense. The other companies, the government money would be better spent just going directly to extend the network from literally across the street there. Or even if they have to split their CMTS node or their DOCSIS system into two, it's probably going to be cheaper for them to do that than to pay me, $100,000 to be able to build, to these locations. The other thing is, right there, I'm not sure what they're calling themselves these days, but the level 3 POP was literally also right next to, right next to and across the street, from some of these homes that were, being made available to build. One of the unique challenges is the long haul fiber. Of course, people want that to go long distances, but because of that, a lot of people have that long haul fiber right in front of their homes, but they don't actually have any local access fiber available, and such. And this is the type of problem that many people, including myself, face. I had fiber that went to a cell phone tower that was 1,200 feet from my house, just a couple hundred meters. But because that went to a cell phone tower, that was not accessible for the consumer network. So in the U.S., because of that thing that we won't talk about that's in parentheses up there, the U.S. actually made a bunch of money available to local governments. And the way they did that is they sent the money directly down to all of the governments. And because my area had been thinking about the broadband gap problem, in advance, by the time that money actually showed up, they went and actually had some money to potentially spend now that they had done the study and done all of that research. And so, yeah, I won several service areas. I finally, like I said, got that contract to go and build out. I ended up getting a little bit over $2 million, which is when my friends told me I had to stop calling it my hobby ISP because I had gotten, been awarded money. Now, of course, I only get paid after I build it, which is a separate issue. But that's going on. But a lot of the DSL or the WISP, they no longer meet the standards because in the U.S. the standards are now 100 meg down, 10 meg up. But they really want it to be 100 meg symmetric for people to be able to do video visits with their doctors and such. So, in January 2022, this is what I had. I had a little bit over 13 kilometers of fiber network. It's very common to actually get 80% market penetration on an area. I'm now getting in some of the blocks I'm building past. I'm getting 100% of the homes are signing up for service because I've priced it, appropriately. But also some areas I ended up building to. There's one house, in a mile stretch, and that's the case. So yeah, here I had 65 customers, business customer, and I had people getting installed. Now all of a sudden today, I've grown, my area's grown. I'm building in these rural areas, so I'm not passing a lot, even though the distances, as such, are growing. So I've got 22 miles built now. I've started to build past other companies. We had a recent set of ice storms. Ice storms are particularly challenging for the utilities because you get ice on the lines, and then the trees that hang overhead on the lines, those will end up breaking under the weight of the ice because ice is a lot heavier than snow and such. And so now I've got 22 miles of network, but when AT&T goes down, because their little DSL cabinet loses power, and I have a GPON network where I have a backup generator, backup batteries, and such, I'm actually online. I actually took, I think, 8 customers away from AT&T during that week outage that they had. People who were on DSL who weren't, they were thinking they wanted to change, but a number of them, they were working from home. And all of a sudden now they weren't able to do that anymore. And you can tell the boss you can't work for home for a day because you have power or some storm. But once you're going on day 5 or 6, the boss really doesn't like giving you a free week of vacation and such. So what's my network usage look like? Over time, I'm now getting some decent trending. I'm peaking, I've got 2 different 10 gig circuits that come in, and between those 2, you can see the peaks are up around kind of that 2 gig number, when people, are doing something big. But the one other thing I do that's kind of interesting is I don't actually rate shape any of my customers because this isn't my primary job, and I don't want them to call me and say, I can't get the speed that I want. It'd be very unfortunate if they call me and say, I'm not getting my speed in the middle of one of my, work calls about our backbone for my day job, right? I don't want to be getting those calls. And so, I don't rate shape the customers because I don't want them to call me, and I don't want to have to maintain all of those records. They're still billed for whatever rate plan that they select, but there's actually, for the most part, no technical difference in the service that I deliver to them. And I'm not really worried about people bootlegging off of the neighbor's service because a lot of these areas are very big and spread out. So if you're the one house per mile, you could get a very big antenna and you're still not going to pick up the neighbor's Wi-Fi. So today I use some Juniper QFX 5100s. Those are great devices because you run GNOS on them. I can configure them relatively easily, and even though they have a limited FIB scale, I can still speak BGP on them, and I can just limit what routes I actually accept. I actually have, I meant to include it, I'll maybe see if I can upload replacement slides, include the regular expression that I built that allows me to route, because I have 2 carriers that I speak BGP to, and out those 2 carriers, I try to pick the best path within reason out those 2 carriers. And I find that fits nicely into the 128,000 route scale that's in there. But I also am economical on some of this. I have Raspberry Pis as my DHCP servers. Why? Because you don't need much more than that. The power usage on them is low, and especially once you're on the Raspberry Pi 4 hardware, have I mentioned that I'm a nerd? You can USB boot off of them, and so you can actually put a USB with NVMe on it, in a very cost-effective manner, so you're not dealing with like the SD card issues that you would have, where those don't have smart or any of the other capabilities to tell you when they're going to fail. I now have 2 of the Ubiquiti OLTs. I've got the Arista that I bought off eBay as well originally for doing the active Ethernet customers, and then I've got just a nice this cheap Quanta switch which I bought for about $100, which does my house, and that has 2 10 gig uplink ports, and then you'll see heavy presence of the Ubiquiti equipment, and they have this UISP console device which I also bought when it was beta availability and such. It took a while for that to mature. I use that for my CPE for my own home, so my kids sit behind it. So if I need to go and stop them from whatever they're doing, I can block them pretty easily. So yeah, for 2022, lots of stuff. Where I did construction. Ended up getting money out of that. There's also new programs that have popped up out of there. The state of Michigan just closed a program called Robin, which they were doing for expanded broadband, and that was something which I was intending to participate in, but I realized I have a lot on my plate right now. I have a fair number of things that I'm still working on and still doing. I decided not to actually participate in that program, despite all of my friends who are now doing other things. The person who originally got the nearby township to pass on the ballot to do so they could build out universal broadband or universal fiber availability in their township. He's now actually the state coordinator for this agency called the NTIA. So there's 50 states in the U.S. and he's the coordinator for the state of Michigan now. And he previously worked at at the Internet 2 research side. And so he's now the one ensuring that everybody in Michigan is going to get broadband access. So it's very exciting. So I spend a lot of time staring at maps. I don't know how many of you are spending a lot of time looking at outside maps and such. This is the green area is the area that was in service, kind of in the middle of the second half of 2022. You can see it kind of expanded some, and then those yellow areas are roughly where I'm going to be expanding to with all of the federal money. And actually, some of those areas they're actually already getting elongated because of this thing I call the next house problem and such. So now, as of the time I left to get on the plane to come here, this is roughly what my network map looks like. You can see it's continued to grow. I've got that that green conduit there down around this lake community, where people want access. In fact, last night while I was eating dinner, I got a call from my contractor about some problems they were having, constructing down there. So the work never stops, for this, and so continuing to go and connect people up. So yeah, what's the future look like? Well, I'm going to finish building this project I have. I'm going to be competing head-to-head with a lot of these companies. There's also a lot of mergers going on within the space. As I mentioned, Virgin's Fiber, one of the companies that helped me out in the early days, giving me some encouragement, and shared a lot of stuff. They've now been integrated into a larger company, and there's a lot of companies that are going in and building out. And then there's this next house problem, which is once you get service to somebody, they talk to their neighbors, and the next house, they want service too. And so it becomes important to draw those boundaries and to pre-plan for what you're going to do when that next house calls you. And quite often, I'll start the conversation with them, and I'll say, well, I'm very transparent about it. I tell them what my construction costs are. I talk to them directly about what my materials costs are, and then I start with, at minimum, $5,000 to kind of hear what their response is back, and whether or not they're ready to understand what that is. Even for me to build to a single house, the cost is generally about $2,000 to $3,000 per home passed. And so when you're looking at an expense like that, because once you get into the spliced dome materials, all of the cables, the concrete boxes for the side of the road, and such, those concrete boxes now, they started off being about $250 when I started. They're now, I just got an email earlier this week on it, they're now $850 for me. So a lot of those expenses, those materials costs, which used to be a very small percentage of my overall cost, and labor was up there on the high end, they're really starting to not eliminate the labor as it, but they're eating into a lot of flexibility that I had. And then also the other thing is, as you're growing out and becoming bigger, those number of next houses continues to grow, because now you're adjacent to a lot more properties. So, but what about, how do you map? So in order for me to do cost estimation for all of this stuff, I really need to have accurate data. I need to know the size of these properties and other useful information, like, are there pipelines? The one community I'm building in, they have 7 different pipelines that carry everything from compressed natural gas to petroleum products, across those areas. And if you're going to build a line across those pipelines, those pipeline companies, they're going to show up and watch. When we went across one of them, they had a helicopter overhead. I don't know what it costs to fly a helicopter per hour, but they had a helicopter overhead. And I think, like many people, I started off using Google Earth. I think many people are familiar with sharing TMZ files and stuff like that, but Google Earth also has a lot of limitations in what you can do with it. So, what about South Africa? Well, this is some of the data I was able to actually pull from the GIS data. And this actually has strategic, not only gas corridors, but electric corridors that your country apparently has defined. I don't know a lot about this, other than, these are corridors that have been defined for that. But I imagine that if you're doing something in these corridors, there may be the opportunity to collaborate with the companies that are building it, or there may be the opportunity to, figure something else out. Or it might be an area where it's incredibly challenging to do things because these corridors exist. When we're crossing a pipeline, or when somebody's building one of these natural gas pipelines to service a new community that's being developed out in this farm property, we're quite often not able to actually jointly build with those companies. And so there is an advantage of being the first mover and being in the ground, so then we can be the one to supervise when they're building in those areas. And make sure, and then that construction for us is a lot less expensive than it would be for somebody else later. But going and pulling in all of these areas, including the little Johannesburg shape that I was able to pull out of the systems, is definitely interesting to be able to say, okay, this is what things look like. So, I use this software now called QGIS. It's free software, so it's available to you. And there's lots of open GIS data, definitely in the US, and in just a little bit of research, I was able to find some of that data here, for South Africa. Shape files are the most common thing. They're actually these old database files. They're actually underlying as a DBF file. And so you have all of these wonderful limitations from the DOS days of your fields can't be more than like 8 or 10 characters in length. It's really kind of back in that old DOS 8.3 file limits. And well, the KMZ files can be useful if you're editing them in a native tool like Google Earth, but they're hard to edit in QGIS. And so it's actually helpful to be able to transform that stuff. So I use QGIS, I use it to bring in multiple data sources. I build these collections of data, and then I actually can build all the overlays for actually what my design network is and what my actual network is. And one of the things that is quite common is that in the US, one of the ways in which the governments make money off of their GIS data is they actually sell it. they'll sell it on a CD or sell it as a data download. That'll be, actually quite expensive, like $8,000 or $15,000 for the area. So this is how I have mine set up. So I actually bring in, a couple of different things. I bring in all of these RFP addresses. But the stuff that's very exciting is when I get the parcel shape data, they give the parcel shape data away for free, but they don't give you the address or who owns it. But there's another layer called the building footprint layer, where they show you, what registered buildings there are on the property. And in the details, in the metadata of that actually has all the address data for it. It actually has when it was built, and it even has the square footage of the building. So you can actually go and look at it and figure out what's there. And so this is how this is the main view I look at through a lot of this stuff, and you can see the details of, you can see the little star for the address, that I got funding for, and you can see the little, green triangles, which is where we're going to put the little handhold boxes or pull boxes for the fiber cable, along the road, because you have to go and put them such that we can get service to every single house, including if we cross the road. So having all that data, being able to look at that, look at the zoning of the property, figure out what's going to be there in the future, that's really important. The other thing that's really cool is, so you see here, there's 3 houses, but there's 4 parcels. So when I built past this, I needed to factor in this other parcel is ready to be built on for another home. And I want to be able to build my network such that when somebody builds a house there, it is easy for me to service it. And this is back once again to the lesson that my friend Ryan taught me about stuff, which is you have to count every house, every parcel by ones. You can't skip any of them. That cost of the second conduit is very low when you look at the cost of the entire project. Fiber is also relatively cheap. If the construction labor is the most expensive part, what's it going to cost you to come back if you make a mistake along the way? Or if your contractor makes a mistake? How soon do you need to correct that? Which is, you need to correct it as soon as possible. And what are your future network needs going to be? So in talking about this, one of the things that I got approached about, regarding is there's a number of companies that are building satellite internet right now. Obviously there's the Starlink service. Amazon recently launched it or announced that they're intending to launch their service in the future. But what's happening is they're actually building satellite downlink sites in rural areas. So they're actually going to the farming communities and looking for where there is fiber available. And in building out, I now have the ability, I was talking with one of the carriers and they said, oh, we want to know where all your handholds are. I'm like, really? You want to know where all the handholds are? Like even out in these rural environments? And they're like, I can just service you wherever out there. They're like, no, we want to know exactly where that exact access point is, because then we can show that to our satellite company customer and stuff like that. Also, and I presume this is the same here, is that the cellular networks, they continue to grow. And they continue to expand out. As they're launching in the US, we're on 5G. I see my phone here is on 3G. But the really key thing is, when you're here, you want to be able to have good low latency access on those networks and not be using fixed wireless or backhaul. So when it rains like it did last night, that might take down a microwave link or something like that. And fiber really, is a superior technology when it comes to all of this. And the same thing when you start talking about, the GPON stuff. The XGS PON is superior to GPON. Any sort of WDM technologies lets you put a lot more data on the line, than the direct light. And bandwidth usage, I think as we all know, continues to go up and to the right. People want more data, they want faster speeds, and fiber is really the way to do it. And I'm very happy and lucky to have been able to go and build out an all fiber-based network, from the very beginnings of it, and not be saddled with a lot of legacy technology. At some point, my GPON, my active Ethernet, those are going to saddle me down, but that's perhaps a problem for another day, and maybe those electronics will fail before then. So What's the future? Going to continue to expand. Going to continue to look for partnerships. Continue to upgrade my network. I've got people saying, hey, we'll sell you an IRU instead of selling me an additional 10 gig wave back to the data center where the local internet exchange is. Going to continue moving on with new technology. I'm building out to new business customers. The local business customers, they're calling me rather than calling, the incumbents like AT&T and Comcast. Or they called them first and they got a price, and I'm able to compete on price and performance with them. A lot more traffic, and really the internet continues to grow and be the platform of the future. We're seeing everything that we're doing now be based upon this, and so it's a very exciting time to be one of the underpinning parts of any business, any company's any nation's economy, and whatever. Seems to be the way we're going. So with that, I'm done. I have time. Do I have a little bit of time for questions?
We can have questions for less coffee. So, questions. Could you use the mic, please, and name and affiliation if you have any? If we have any questions. Yeah, sorry, we only have one mic and it's Try having a room down in the 500s to get a good walk up every morning.
And like I said, I'll be here, through Friday, so please come find me. And you can also come ask me my questions too. But we'll do those on the side, so you can yell at me there. Hello.
It's Mauch on Link Africa. What's your take on the future of the likes of Starlink and the Earth satellites? So the likes of that being disrupting, that technology disrupting areas that sit outside of the metropoles.
Yeah, I think that's
I think that's interesting, but at some point, they're going to have to build the density for a downlink station in those areas. And so somebody is going to have to bring that fiber out into those populated areas. And so if it's a permanently inhabited area, I don't really see very many options other than going and building something there. I mean, is there, there may not be electricity there, or there may not be like telephone service there. But like, is there cellular service in those areas?
Okay, so the reason I'm asking is in my previous life, I built 4G networks over Ka satellites. So we used MTN to do all the research, and literally could deliver 4G to the middle of absolutely nowhere at a relatively cheap price. And I was just thinking that to long-haul fiber out there, the economics of it just simply don't make sense. So we're talking Nigeria, here's a dot on a map, lights up a $10,000 tower using a Ka-band DSAT backhaul. That technology is there. And my question is, do you see it that a lot of areas that sit in the rural just may never have fiber?
I don't think that's the case. I think the fiber will eventually make it there, because the cost of the fiber relative to building, a dish or tower or something like that is relatively low. And so when you look at the economics of the ubiquity access points that are outside, those were $100 US retail. And so once you start talking about getting into those environments, delivering a Wi-Fi network, even if you're using 1 gig BiDi optics chained every 20 kilometers with a solar panel, the power draw for something like that is very low. And the fiber cable, you can get a single strand fiber cable for less than 7 cents a foot. And so getting out there, you start looking at it, the cost of doing that is actually relatively low. So when you're talking to a little bit of scale, you're looking at, I can get a 12, for the same physical size cable, I can get a 12-strand fiber cable for about, 1 cent per strand per foot. But it still costs me $165 just for the guy to show up to the job site to bury it. And over those 12 strands, I could run, 64 channels of 400 gig ZR. Yep.
If we can try and make quick questions, because we're...
I have a comment, not a question, so we'll be quick. Jared, great job. As a recovering ISP myself, I commend you on going down that road. Just wanted to highlight one point you had in the slide that I think you had there, which is a sort of a morphing of, instead of just becoming a fiber to the home provider, residential subscriber, with that second conduit, you now have the opportunity to service end user businesses, but as you just said in some of your closing statements, you are now also having other carriers come to you. So the point that I learned in my fiber business was that by putting fiber around became a game changer, and now all of a sudden not being one of those little cookie baby ISPs, I was another carrier. And so folks like AS174 came and rented dark fiber from me because they wanted to do stuff. Sure, they're a competitor. They still paid an IRU for dark fiber, and it was fine. I didn't get support call off internet being slow. I only got support call on fiber cable at the time. So yeah, just to folks that put fiber in the ground, you have a wide range of revenue sources, and don't just go put a 12-strand cable in there. Go put a 288 in. It's really cheap in the long term. So that was more of a comment, and thanks for highlighting and coming down.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you wanted to ask a question? Could you, so we can see how many that we have? No, I knew you were first. I'm just saying.
I'll say if you want coffee, I will not be offended if you go get it.
Good morning, my name is Sam from East. And what we do is we aggregate networks. So when you mentioned we had GIS up on there, you just wanted to quite excited. My comments on getting an overview picture of the network is that we actually deal with almost 7 different formats of information to try and aggregate. So it's a very difficult process to get a lovely holistic view of networks in this product.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of people, they treat Google Earth as the industry standard, but Google Earth doesn't scale when you have very large data sets, and you really have to have something like QGIS that can have an SQL backend to be able to query it.
Hi, Dylan from Smart Technology Center. First of all, thanks for coming up. This is why I'm in the industry, right? To come to talks like these and actually listen to the great stories out there. But I've got a lot of questions actually, but I'll stick to 2 of them. So number one, address spacing for your IP address spacing. You didn't really mention how you're handling that. Obviously, us here as ISPs, we have to apply with that, communicate our blocks and so on and so forth. Did you have to go through that kind of process in terms of taking into consideration the US essentially ran out of fiber space a long time ago, or that region?
Yeah, so Aaron actually set aside, so I'm in the US, so I'm in the Aaron region. Aaron set aside IP space. Specifically, anyone can get V6, and they have a special policy. If you hold V6 space, you can come and ask for a /24 every 6 months of V4 space, and so I've so far done that. I'm actually, I have a calendar thing that went off on Monday that said my 6-month period had expired, so I can now go and apply for more IP space. And these are the types of things you treat with like any other, they won't like me saying it, but any other regulatory, compliance thing. You go and you say, yep, I need to go do this. This is something, but they did make provisions in that for it. And the nice thing is that IP space is also contiguous. So they actually reserve an entire block, so when you go there, you can go and do that. So if you operate in multiple, RAR regions, and and you also operate in the Aaron region, it is possible to do that. And I think it's either 4.9 or 4.10. I think it's maybe 4.10 because they had different ones for different classifications. And but you need to deploy V6. And so I've deployed V6. About a third of my customers do DHCP V6 and get a V6 address as well with a prefix delegation. And I see that in the Facebook portal, stuff. I can see how much of it's V6.
Cool. And then the second question I had was in terms of the way that you're supporting these customers. We have a very unique problem here where the backhaul is still very expensive to get from either a rural area or from a certain area back to the data center. So, that's not necessarily an option to give everyone a 1 gig or anything like that. So, when it starts coming to speed issues inside of the home, given that it's maybe not related to the actual fiber service itself, but other issues inside of the home, how do you have a team of people that you're working with at the moment? Do you have a company set up? Do you have an office? Do you have a call center? Or, for me, it sounds like you're waiting for something.
My phone has dual SIM. So the business line rings on the second SIM. And so they can call or email, and then I'm looking at Nokia has their XGS-PON system that does stuff, and an integrated Wi-Fi solution that will allow me to peer into the home and do stuff there. And so that's what I'm looking at to replace the Ubiquiti stuff, because I've had a few issues with the Ubiquiti that I haven't been able to move past. Yep.
Thank you very much, Jared.
No, thank you.
As he said, he's here all week. He's happy to talk to anyone. Break for coffee, if we could be back in, say, 20 minutes at 25 to. Thanks.